Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's going to be talking about leasing and whether it's worth it or not. Before getting into this video though, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And if you want to see more content just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post videos every single day. Let's get into it. To properly explain what leasing is, we quickly need to talk about two other methods that you can use to purchase a car. One is by taking out a loan on a car, and the other is by paying cash. Now, when you pay cash for a car, it's a pretty straightforward transaction because you're going in and you're paying for that car in full up front, and you're getting the title to the car because, well, you are the new owner because, well, you just paid for the car in full. And so all that's associated with this transaction is your cash and the car. Now, when you contrast that to financing is where you're having a third party pay for the car for you, and you are in turn paying back that third party over a set period of time with a little bit of extra money on top of that because, well, interest is a thing, and a third party has to get something for paying for the car for you. And this is where people get confused because people think that if they finance a car, they own the car, and that's not reality. Until you have that car fully paid off, you don't actually own the car because the lending institution that paid for the car for you has the title in hand. So unless you have a title in hand, it's not actually your car. And that's something that's very important to remember in this video. Now, if we contrast leasing with traditional financing and paying cash, well, it's way different than paying cash, but it actually is pretty similar to traditional financing because with leasing, you still have a third party company that's going and purchasing the car for you, and they're letting you use the car while you make payments to them. But the biggest difference is with traditional financing, once you make all your payments, you get the title and you own the car. Whereas with leasing, once you make all your payments on a lease, you don't get the title and you don't get the car because the leasing company still owns the car. They're basically renting it out to you, and that's where things start to change quite a bit when you compare it to the other two methods of purchasing a car. Other than the whole rental concept, there are some other key differences associated with a lease. First off is, well, how they calculate the payments on a lease versus traditional financing, because again, with traditional financing, they're basically just taking the purchase price of the vehicle, spreading that out over a set term, and then obviously adding in the interest, and then that's how your payment's calculated, right? With a lease, they're taking the purchase price of the vehicle, and then they're setting what's called a residual value, or what they think the vehicle is going to be valued at the end of the lease. And then they're adding in their, own interest into the lease, which is called money factor. And you can actually convert the money factor rate into an interest rate so you can compare it to traditional financing. Always recommend you do that. But, that's the lease interest that they throw in. And so as someone who is taking out a lease, then what you're doing is you're paying the difference between that purchase price amount and the residual value plus the interest you pay in the lease, again, the money factor. And that's how your payments are calculated. So completely different compared to traditional financing. And the differences don't end there because, again, with traditional financing, at the end of the loan term, you own the car outright. And so you can choose to keep it, you can sell it, you can do whatever you want with it because it's your car. Whereas at the end of the lease term, it's not your car, and so you actually have more options. One option is to turn in the lease, but this can be pretty complicated because with leases, there is a mileage limit, and if you go over the mileage limit, then you're going to incur a fee with the leasing company. And on top of that, leasing companies will also charge you for any wear and tear on the vehicle, which is kind of ridiculous because, of course, there's going to be wear and tear on the vehicle. It's a vehicle that you're driving. But leasing companies want to nickel and dime you for everything so they can make the most amount of money possible out of the situation. Now, another option you have at the end of the lease is to actually buy out the car. Now, you buy it out for the residual value, the value that the leasing company said that the car will be worth at the end of the term, and that's basically what you're paying it down to. But again, this is something where leasing companies will try to nickel and dime you, where they'll, basically give you a bunch of fees, especially after the whole pandemic situation, because they realized that if they had the leases turned in instead of people buying them out, then they would have been able to make a lot more money reselling those cars. So another situation that should be simple, but is actually pretty complicated. And something else that's interesting about this whole buyout situation is you could actually take out a loan on the residual amount with the lease. So think about this for a second. So you're paying, interest, right, money factor to the leasing company over the course of the lease. And at the end of the lease, you buy it out and they take out a loan on the buyout. And so then you're paying traditional finance interest. And so you're kind of taking out like two loans on the same car. The first obviously is a lease. The second is traditional financing, but you're paying a whole lot of interest over the course of the lease. And this is something that I really want to emphasize. Do the math before you do this, because a lot of people will go and lease a car and then they'll buy it out and they'll take a loan out on it at the end. And then the amount of money that they pay for that car after all interest is paid on the loan and after all money factor is paid on the lease is just astronomical. And something else you need to know is with a lease, you're only paying taxes on the payments with the lease. You're not paying taxes on the entire purchase price of the car. So if you do buy it out, you have to pay taxes on that buyout amount because you didn't pay the full taxes up front. Like with traditional financing, is when you traditionally finance a car or pay cash for a car, you pay all the taxes up front. And this brings us back to the original question with today's video, and that is if leasing is worth it or not. Now, historically, people leased for a number of reasons. First off, so they could get a nice new shiny car every few years. Also, so they could have a payment that was typically lower than if they traditionally financed the car, so they could have a car that was covered under warranty for the entire duration of them having that car. And so that they didn't have to have the stress of selling a car when, the time came to get something new. And here's the deal. With the first thing, getting the nice new shiny car every few years, I mean, this is just pretty straightforward. Most lease terms are pretty short, especially when you compare it to traditional financing. Most people will take out a loan that's anywhere from 5 to 7 years in length, whereas with a lease, they're usually 2 to 4 years in length. Some people will take out extended leases that are like, 60, 72 months in length. I even saw 84-month leases, which I thought was actually crazy, and people did it, and I don't understand why to this day, but it's actually a thing where you can lease a car as long as people are traditionally financing. All people seem to care about is payments in today's world. And then, when it came to the warranty side of things, well, because these lease terms are typically short, well, they're usually within the range of what manufacturers have as their basic warranty or their bumper-to-bumper warranty that covers everything. So you just don't have to worry about things breaking on the car. And then with payments, what you typically saw is that the money factor rate, when you converted it into an interest rate, was usually lower than whatever interest rates were being offered on the market at any given time. And then usually residual values on leases were strong enough on most cars that were offered as leases that, well, the payment was going to be pretty low because the difference number between the purchase price and the residual value was usually not a massive amount. And something that I didn't mention earlier in the video that I'm going to bring up now as we're talking about this is the fact that leasing was subsidized a massive amount by leasing companies and manufacturers. They would usually offer some sort of big cash rebate if you chose the leasing option versus traditional financing to buy down the payment, to make it so the payment with the lease was going to be significantly lower than that payment with traditional financing. With all that being said, leasing is not worth it. And that's why this video is most likely titled Leasing is a Scam, something or the other, whatever I have concocted at like 2 in the morning for a title. But here's the deal. With lease payments, they're not nearly as competitive as what they used to be. If you go into any given dealership today and have them give you what's called an A/B pencil that shows you what the financing payments will be in a car and the lease payments on a car, what you're probably going to find is that the lease payments are as much as the finance payments and sometimes even more. And this is for a number of reasons. First off, leasing companies aren't really giving super competitive residual values on cars anymore because they want people to basically turn in cars. They don't want them to buy them out. And so they're doing a lot with the residual values to make things kind of ugly on that front. And then on top of that, money factor rates are super, super high. And then the biggest thing that's really killed leasing is that it's not subsidized like it used to be. Automakers are not giving big, cash rebates on leasing, and leasing companies aren't either. And so with leases having less discounts, horrible residual values, and higher, rates that you're going to pay for the money itself means that, well, leasing isn't going to work out. And on top of that, just like I mentioned earlier in the video, leasing companies will try to nickel and dime you for everything. And so seriously, read your leasing contract before you enter it, because when you try to exit the lease, before the lease is over, or try to turn it in at the end, or try to buy it out for the residual value, they will try to get as much money as they possibly can. And so leasing just isn't as advantageous as it was in the past with everything that's happening with it. And so seriously, you need to look at the lease rate and the finance rate before you sign on that lease, because what you're going to find is that the lease just probably doesn't make any sort of sense. I mean, the dumbest thing that you could do is go in and take out a lease on a car and have a payment that's just as high as what it would have been to traditionally finance the car, because if you would traditionally finance the car, at least you're paying that down and you'll eventually own the car at the end. Whereas the lease, you're just making these payments that, again, are just as high with the lease, but you're just paying down the car for the leasing company instead of paying it down for yourself. Before we cap off today's video, I do want to quickly dive back into the business owner thing that I mentioned earlier in the video. So here's the deal. Leasing could still make sense for certain business owners because with leases that are under a business, you get to write off the entire lease payment, which obviously means that you're gonna be paying less in taxes overall. And this is really beneficial if you want to lease like a fancy sports car, something like that, that does not have a gross vehicle weight rating of over 6,000 pounds, because, well, if it fits within that 6,000 pound plus category, you can write off the entire vehicle under the business. But if it's under that, well, the write-off's not nearly as good, and that's where leasing can come into play. And so I think that's the party that could still somewhat benefit from leases, but at the same time, usually it just doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, for the time being, we're pretty much seeing the death of the lease, but I think that it will be back probably in a couple of years once the market calms down with used car values, and once this whole interest rate situation figures itself out. I think we're going to see some, you know, incentives and, you know, again, reasons for people to lease. That's going to sum things up. If this video helped you out, I would really appreciate it. Again, if you'd subscribe, and plus, like I said, I post these videos every single day, and I'll see you.